safe to say the Command & Conquer franchise has left a significant mark on the RTS genre as a whole. Being once so long time ago a titan of the genre alongside the likes of Age of Empires, Warcraft and eventually StarCraft. Despite its age and now the relative silence of the franchise, with EA doing God only knows what to it at this point. Personally, it's a franchise that I hold near and dear, with it and Age of Empires 2 being very frequently played games as a kid who had no idea what he was doing on an old compact Windows 98 PC. Jesus, I'm showing my age here. Nonetheless, it's a series that I still regularly play, either through mods like Mental Omega, Twisted Insurrection, and more recently Tib Dawn Redo and Combined Arms, and the list only goes on. With the release of the Remastered collection June 2020, it's safe to say that my interest in Tiberian Dawn exploded once more. One thing got me thinking about playing though. We see the little units running around and armor smashing through anything foolish enough to get in its way. I thought, hey, what would these things be like in the real world? So, eventually, after working up the willpower to get out of bed and onto my PC to bother looking up what would be what, it's resulted in the following you're about to witness. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you all the arsenal of Command & Conquer Tiberian Dawn.
We are going to have to act if we want to live in a different world.
So just a brief note and a few disclaimers before starting to hopefully clear up some confusion. GDI forces will be taken into a much deeper depth in this video for two main reasons. One being GDI at this time were still under the banner of the United Nations, thus primarily GDI is a peacekeeping force, in contrast to Tiberian Sun and Tiberian Wars where they were their own separate entity. If this is the case, the policy of COE or Contingent Owned Equipment would be in effect, which is essentially a policy allowing participating forces to use their own nation's weapons and equipment, which would be reimbursed by the United Nations after the service is completed. This came into effect in 1996, so just in time for Tib War 1. And point number 2, in regards to the non-Africa campaign, mainly Egyptian and South African forces are mentioned for GDI, due to two missions where Nod assaults Egypt and the last one from South Africa. Given the turmoil that may have been caused by Nod and civil wars raging between non-affiliated and GDI supporting villages, it's hard to predict what forces would be utilised for the corresponding locations. Closest real-life operations to suit said conflicts may be along the lines of UNMISS and UNIMID, both being in Sudan. Therefore, GDI coverage in Africa may be sporadic. On the topic of this, and GDI for European campaign, I've decided to use equipment and units from the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy and Russia, primarily given the close proximity of non-activities near said nations, so my apologies Eastern Europe, Iberia and Baltic states, but we'll be here all bloody day, otherwise in terms of the video. I will only be covering Tiberian Dawn units as well, weaponry and vehicles, and not stuff from Renegade because, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. In terms of the timeline, I've taken the starting date as sometime in the late 1990s as the starting point of the war. However, it's speculated the war may be started in the 2020s due to some in-depth look by No Strings' video on the first Tib War, which I do recommend checking out. But for the purpose of this video, we'll stick to sometime in the 90s, and maybe sometime in the future do another video if it was in the 2020s. So, with all of that out of the way, let us begin. Starting off with the basic yet frontline infantry, which makes up the backbone of the infantry force, the Minigunner. Since its initiation as one of the two units we start with in both campaigns, it sees itself through the majority of the first Tib War as an anti-infantry unit. Well, what would its composition consist of if we compared it to modern day? Well, according to the wiki, GDI and non-minigunners are said to have used GAU-3 eliminators and Cobretti AR-70s, but in the render, an M950 9mm Calico is shown, which does exist in the real world. However, with a caliber of only 9mm, it's not going to be useful in medium to long-range combat in comparison to assault rifles, especially with ballistic helmets and protective body armor in play. So, yeah. Therefore, it's likely in Europe we will see GDI forces use a plethora of small arms depending on their nationality. For the sake of saving time, I'll touch on only the rifles that are used and not use various squad weapons like marksman rifles, like machine guns, sidearms, etc, otherwise again we'll be here all day. So, over in the UK, British servicemen may use the L1A1 self-loading rifle or SA-80 bullpup rifles, with the L1A1 being in British service from 1954 to 1994, which was being replaced with the aforementioned SA-80 as far back as 1985, and still in service today. American GI forces would mostly appear with the NATO Stanag 5.56 M16A2s and M16A4s alongside the M4 carbine, with the M16A2 being introduced by the US Marines in 1983 and the Army in 1986, the A4 being brought in 1998 and somewhere near or at the start of the First Tib War, with finally the M4 carbine being brought in 1994. With this in mind, it's highly likely the M16A2s be the prominent weapon with the United States issued GDI troops fighting NOD forces. Now, you might be wondering, well, why not the A1 or the A3? Well, the reason being the A1 being used in Vietnam, and it was reportedly god-awful according to veterans of the war. And oddly, the A3 being used in small numbers by Navy SEALs, and little modifications made to differentiate between A3 and A2, so very little difference. Italian forces would utilise the 5.56 Beretta AR-70 brought in 1972, and eventually the AR-70-90 variant in 1990, with French troopers using primarily the bullpup FAMAS F1, which was introduced in 1978, and if possible the FAMAS G2, with the latter being different as it was designed to take NATO-issued ammunition. The problem arises with the G2 being brought in sometime around 1994, and likely not produce a handout in time for combat operations against NOD. Over in our Russian Federation comrades, well, not comrades anymore since that little spiff going on in Eastern Europe with that country that used to be part of the Soviet Union. You know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to mention it. Would in the majority use their stockpiles of AN-94s or AK-74s and possibly the AKM in desperate situations, with the 5.45mm AK-74 being brought in and widely replacing the 7.62mm AK-47 and AKM in 1974. The 5.45 AN-94 likely appear in small numbers throughout the war due to entering service in 1997, and as mentioned, the AKM still being in use, albeit in small numbers. Over in Deutschland, German forces in the fight against NOD shortly after the GDI invasion of Latvia are highly likely to use in small numbers the 5.56 H&K Heckler & Koch G36, introduced in 1997, or the older 7.62mm G3 battle rifle, which the G36 was to replace. It's highly probable that G3 stockpiles will be cracked open and given to German forces as NOD advances into Germany, as they did in the European theatre. Over in Africa, our Egyptian forces, using various rifles like the American M16, the Italian Beretta AR-70-90, and the locally manufactured Mahdi assault rifle, with the rifle in question being an Egyptian indigenous produced copy of the Russian AKM. For South Africa, the 5.56 Vector R4 assault rifle and R5 carbine rifles, with said rifles being licensed variants of the Israeli IMI Galil, may see service alongside the Belgian 7.62mm FN FAL, the good old right arm of democracy. Over with NOD forces, primarily acting as a guerrilla group, of course, it's understandable that they're likely to make use of widely available firearms such as the AK-47, AKMs, or AK-74s as standard issue firearms, along with whatever weaponry can be obtained from GDI forces. NOD's arsenal becomes a little hazier because of this, and it's likely they obtain weaponry from groups not so friendly to the Western world, if you catch my drift. But there is one nation that we can highlight: China. As such, it's highly likely firearms like the QPZ-95, Type 81 would appear, although the 95 may not be as widely available as it came into service only in 1997, and as such is like the Type 81s, which entered service in 83, may be issued. Both sides are known to wear BDUs, or battle dress uniforms, with, according to the CNC Wiki, GDI having a 6-color desert camo pattern and NOD a more urban environment pattern, which is believed to be a quote-unquote monochromatic version of the United States' M81 woodland pattern. These camos were worn despite the theatre, and as both are seen with these patterns in Europe and Africa. In relation to actual body equipment like armour and helmets, GDI are known to wear PASGET, or Personal Armour System for ground troops, helmets and bulletproof vests until later in the war when they had to swap to flat jackets and steel helmets like the Spectre helmet used by the French forces in 1992 and the German Gefechtsheim helmet due to logistics requirements and Nod's toll on the war. In the real world, PASGID does exist for the United States, along with the Ranger body armor and Britain utilizing enhanced combat body armor. It's unknown what mainland European forces would utilize, but it's most likely Kevlar steel plate ballistic vests. However, it is known that German forces may implement what's known as Splitterschutzweste, roughly translated to fragmentation vest or splitter vest. I'm sure a kind-friendly German would assist in the comments with this. For non-minigunners, they make use of steel helmets with old Soviet 6B2, 6B3 or 6B5 body armor, given not strong ties to the Soviet Union. In the modern world, armor and aircraft rule supreme, and therefore infantry need to adapt accordingly. In-game, this comes in the form of the GDI and Nod rocket trooper. The in-game icon depicts an American M72 Law used by both GDI and Nod, with some other cutscenes showing FIM-92 Stingers and a T-4 fire and forget rocket launchers. Without doubt, Nod forces could procure Soviet RPG-7s for anti-tank support, and Soviet 9K-38 or 9K-32 Strelas, alongside the FIM-92 Stinger missile for anti-air defense. Thanks to Chinese support, it's likely Nod will be supplied with the PF-89, FHJ-84, and Type 69 nice RPGs. Anti-tank support with the PF-89 being introduced in 1993, the FHJ-84 in 1984, and the Type 69 nice in 1970. China may also issue the HN-5 man-portable surface-to-air missile launchers in small numbers. The possibility of QW-1 and QW-2 launchers, with the former being revealed in 1994 and the latter in 1998. For GDI forces deployed in Europe and Africa, we will see US forces use the aforementioned AT-4, as shown on the build icon, and the M72 Law, as shown in some cutscenes. The M3 Carl Gustaf recordless rifle, which was brought in around 1991, and sporadic appearances of the FGM-148 Javelin, which was introduced in 1996 with US forces, making primary use of the FIM-92 Stinger for anti-air measures, with the launcher being in use since 1981. Given the tough fortifications of Nod defenses like the turret and the obelisk, there may be appearances of the M141, a shoulder-mounted launcher designed for anti-fortification operations, albeit introduced in 1999. Across the Great Pond then, British GDI forces would utilise Javelin and AT-4s, albeit dubbed the L1A2 and L2A1 ILAWs in British arsenals, with their domestic Starstreak shoulder-mounted missile system introduced in 1997 being used for anti-air measures. Over to continental Europe, French GDI forces are similar to use AT-4s, known locally as the ABL or Anti-Bleu by French forces. Sorry, France. With many launchers in France's arsenal being introduced post-Tib War 1. As such, it's likely France may make use of Lend-Lease Stinger missiles for anti-air defences, or if possible, British Starstreak weapons systems. If all else fails, maybe a turbo-boosted frozen baguette will knock out a Nod Apache. Who knows? It's France. Anything happens, sir. For Germany, GDI forces as part of the Bundeswehr would utilise Panzerfaust 3s and stockpiles of older Mark II Carl Gustafs, with the former being introduced in 1987 and the Mark IIs entering originally Western German hands sometime after 1964. Like with France, it's likely German GDI forces may make use of Lend-Lease shoulder-launched anti-air systems like the Stinger, otherwise the sheer seriousness and bureaucracy of the Germans will overpower any electrical system and Nod aircraft, send them crashing to the ground like some natural EMP. Yeah, no, not really. Keep doing what you do, Germany. You're doing great. I hope. Hope you're all having fun. Anyway, Italian GDI forces will make use of not weaponized pizzas or explosive spaghetti meals, sadly, but of Panzerfaust 3s, with reportedly 2,000 launchers and 17,000 rockets delivered since the mid-1990s, along with the Instalaza? C-90? Do I need to do the hand thing to... whatever. Rocket launchers, primarily used with Italian special forces and in service since 1990, originally with the Spanish military. As for anti-air measures, unless they somehow yeet frozen pizzas like Captain America's shield with pinpoint accuracy, I'd say they would make use of imported weapons to fit the bill. Over in Russia, when they're not busy doing who knows what, Russian GDI forces would make use of very healthy stockpile of AT and AA systems, with examples of the former being almost every RPG in existence since they made the damn thing being used. Well, again no surprise they're coming from the former Soviet Union, such as the RPG-7, RPG-18, RPG-22, 26, 27, 28, 29 shoulder mounted systems. Yeah, they made the thing, so yeah. For anti-air measures, examples include whatever 1932, 1934, 1938 air defense systems haven't been stolen by NOD at this point. Over in Africa, Egyptian GDI forces would have used primarily RPG-7s and M72 laws for portable anti-tank systems, as many Egyptian infantry-based AT systems are deployable anti-tank guided missiles, thanks to something like a tow launcher. For air threats, Egyptian forces would have deployed the Sakar-I, a domestic version of the Soviet Strela 2 1932 mentioned earlier. Along with this, appearances of the 9834, FIM-92 and 9838 would also be used. For South Africa, primarily the RPG-7 and M40 recoilless rifles would be used, very small numbers of AT-4s and Carl Gustav launchers being used as testing for replacing the RPG-7. For anti-air measures, few numbers of the British Starstreak AA may be implemented near the end of the war, or as non-influence escalates in Africa, as orders were placed for these back in December 2002. Moving on to the GDI Infantry Support Specialist and a strong source of not just headaches for NOD infantry, the GDI Grenadier. In-game, it's not specified what the grenade used is, but most likely the M2 Pineapple grenade judging by the build icon, which is odd that they decided to go with this despite the M2 Pineapple being phased out as far back as 1969 by US forces and replaced with the M67 frag grenade, which would be the widely accepted grenade used by GDI forces in this timeline, but, you know, you're fielding a unit in the late 90s that's lobbing grenades like it's World War One, so whatever, I guess. Nonetheless, European-based GDI forces may deploy with the Swiss HG-85, which is standard with Britain, which was designated the L109A1 and bought from the Swiss, which was delivered around March 2001. Likely sometime during the war, unless these came to be, it's likely the UK would have used their existing stockpile of Mills bombs, grenades which would have seen use in the British Army since World War One. Well, here we go. And the British variant of the American M26, known as the L2 series. German Grenadiers are likely to deploy a combination of the DM-51 and DM-41 hand grenades, with the latter being a variant of the American M26 grenade used by the West German Army until 1975, when the swap to the DM-51 kicked in. Italian Grenadiers are likely to use a combination of their own OD-82 hand grenades produced back in 1982, and, if needed, even hand out their older S.S.M Mod 35 grenades, a device which was used by Italian forces during World War II, whenever they fought, or could fight. Insert Italy being a bad army here. France is a peculiar candidate when it comes to grenades, as besides the F1 being used, no, not the racing thing, the grenade that was used as World War One until the end of World War II, France took a step towards rifle grenades, with one in particular being the APAV-40, a rifle grenade that was designed to be fired from the FAMAS assault rifle. Similarly, France utilised the American M203, which would have been used in tandem with the M16A2, a gun that was used in French arsenals with special operations units as of 2023. It's likely that they've been replaced though. Over in Russia, those boys again, Grenadiers belonging to the Federation are likely to use a combination of underbarrel GP25s alongside with RGD-5, RGO and RGN hand grenades, each being grenades produced by the Soviet Union. Egyptian forces are not known to use hand grenades. I'm sure they do, but will most likely use old American M2 Pineapples or Soviet grenades like mentioned earlier. However, they do make use, like France, with underslung grenade launchers for the Mahdi rifle, known as simply the Mahdi GL, which oddly is a variant of the American M203 slapped to a Mahdi, which, if anyone recalls, is a variant of the Soviet AKM, so best of both worlds, I guess, which is known to be used firing 40mm grenades, using it alongside the M79 single-shot grenade launchers. South African GI forces are reported to have used the American M26, and likely still do, with an addendum utilised possibly the 75mm Heat rifle grenade based off of the Energia anti-tank rifle grenade designed to fire from the R1, which is a variant of the FN FAL produced under South African licence. It's safe to say, regardless, the Grenadier poses more than just a simple threat for NOD infantry, but NOD were about to match that with a concept that has been around since roughly the 8th century AD, with something that humanity has known and used ever since it's pretty much gained sentience. born from the will to drive out and scar the enemy mentally and physically in the fields of World War I, and seeing service throughout World War II and the Cold War, the Flamethrower makes its way back into the modern world thanks to the Brotherhood. After a long period since the Flamethrower's discontinuation due to the changing tide of global warfare, it's possible NOD would be deployed either using old American M2 Flamethrowers or Soviet ROKS-3 or LPO-50s. It's most likely NOD forces could obtain the LPO-50 over the ROKS-3, given the former was made to replace the latter at the end of the Second World War. The LPO-50 was later used widely by NVA forces in Vietnam and even by IRA irregulars during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, with, in particular, one incident involving such came about on the 13th of December 1989, when an attack was made on a Derriere checkpoint just outside of Rosslea, where an LPO-50 was used in attacking said checkpoint. Oddly, given the encumbrance of infantry operating flamethrowers, having to carry the actual weapon itself as well as the oxygen and fuel canisters along with their basic equipment, which seems similar to the Minigunner, so the helmet, the vest, the whole shebang, they move faster than their basic minigunners. Maybe NOD really did ramp up Project Regenesis and their cybernetics, and who knows, it's game logic, it's fabulous. As referred, flamethrowers have ceased to be an efficient close-quarter weapon due to high risk of collateral damage and the existence of some machine guns and shotguns being more potent room cleaners, thus a possible new concoction of flame-based weaponry used by NOD militants trained in close-quarters combat in the hand of NOD. While in Renegade, just for reference, they do show some fire resistance, flamethrowers in Tiberian Dawn are just as susceptible as any other infantry unit. If deployed for the modern battlefield, it's likely they'd use fire retardant suits, which would be commissioned with aluminized materials, or lightweight metals for layman terms, to improve movement and reduce stress in the wear, as well as combat fatigue for humid or hot regions like in Africa, along with either a flak jacket, Kevlar vest or steel plate helmet over the suit for small arms protection. In case flamethrowers weren't enough to toast GDI soldiers, NOD steps it up further by commissioning the Chem Warriors, a unit that appears to adopt a German Dräger Simplex gas mask to a standard urban BDU, and not that much of a difference in regards to the chemical dispenser compared to NOD flamethrower. Although not specified, the weapon may likely be a modified, or perhaps the same weapon used by the flamethrower, although adapted for use with Tiberian. It's never specified exactly how the weapon is, so unfortunately there is not much to go off of. While something as poisonous and volatile as Tiberian does not exist in our world, please let's hope not. The last few years have been interesting enough without Tiberian coming to Earth. I'm sure we all know how that's going. I'm willing to bet many Chem Warriors would be more familiar with chemical weapons that exist in our timeline, like chlorine and mustard gas, or even nerve agents like sarin or soman, and thus be organised and deployed on the battlefield via long-range projectiles, not charging headfirst into organised GDI forces. Otherwise, Chem Warriors may be reassigned to domestic terror operations. Boy, YouTube is going to love this video, I can tell you that. Attacking civilian and GDI centres with chemical agents like nerve gases or blistering agents like mentioned earlier. If somehow NOD are able to create a more acidic, toxic, sprayable chemical weapon, it would be wise for NOD forces to deploy with some form of NBC, nuclear, biological or chemical protection suits, and perhaps a modification to the weapon to prevent corrosion and allow a further spray of the weapon, reducing the risk of exposure to the operator and any surrounding NOD troops. NBC suits can be modified from government-issued suits or old recommissioned Chinese or Soviet Womble suit. No, not him. Not him. Soviet Womble suits. None. Anyway, and like the flamethrower, have either a flak jacket, Kevlar vest, or steel plate vest to protect against shrapnel and small arms fire. Accompanying this may be old Chinese GK-80 or Soviet SSH-68 helmets to protect the old noggin. How all this would fare in an actual Tiberium outbreak? Who knows? I don't want to know. Please, no Tiberium. The world is on fire enough as is. Send it off to Mars, that'll be interesting. With war comes damage and death. Nothing lasts forever, and even the most well-built of machines and structures crumble and break. But some events happen. The engineers answer the call to get the war machine back up and running. Although it's not capable of repairing, but oddly can capture buildings in Tiberian Dawn, these headstrong lads get the job done when told, and with the satisfaction as long as they're alive. In-game, they're depicted as an average 2 kit with hard hat and work vest depicting team colours. Despite the hostile environment of the first Tib War and various threats from both GDI and NOD, the engineers go in unarmed and remain as such until Tib War 3, where someone amongst GDI command thought having engineers with some form of self-defense may not be such a bad idea after all. Decades later, I think 50 years after the first Tib War? Yeah. Engineers could come from various backgrounds. For GDI, engineers could be civilian volunteers cooperating with the GDI through peacekeeping operations, or belong to the military, engineering, or pioneer corps of their respective nation's armed forces, like for example the United States Army Corps of Engineers, German Pioneertruppe, or British Royal Engineers, just to name a few. Given most buildings for GDI and NOD look the same, for some reason, acquiring schematics wouldn't be such a task. Non-engineers can be derived from various sources, like civilian engineers who are not affiliated can offer their services, or guerrilla fighters with some knowledge of the discipline be recruited. Perhaps even homegrown engineers educated in the hand of NOD. Those that have an aptitude for such a field could be lured or recruited by NOD to serve. It's likely many of these NOD-aligned engineers stem also from PLA engineer construction divisions belonging to China. Ironically, it's best to keep an eye out for this hard hat, since an APC full of them can cause damage worse than a storm of flesh or steel. The wrench is mightier than the sword. We had to get to these guys eventually. A unit that can make or break the game and change it in ways that are irreparable if used correctly. Crucial to any army, these guys are hard to replace, exist yet are often unseen, hit and run fast, the one and only. It's the technician. Okay, look, they have pistols. They're technically commands, so here we go, bear with me. Armed with only a said pistol, technicians really only come into existence if and when the structure they maintain and operate are decommissioned or destroyed, like a tib silo. In an assault, and as usually as last means of defense, are given a firearm in the form of a said pistol. In contrast to Renegade, where non-technicians kind of, electroshock you? Alright. In regards to where technicians originate, GDI technicians may stem from either civilian or military backgrounds, with civilians coming from possibly UN volunteer initiatives, and military personnel, like US Code 10216, allows US military technicians to be identified as non-combatants due to their role more focused on rear-line actions away from combat, more so than engineers would. An emphasis on civilian technicians may come about due to their usually bright sweaters, non-existent body protection, and poor morale and weapon discipline when engaging or are engaged in a firefight. Non-technicians are similar in this matter, with the exception of Black Hand technicians as encountered in Renegade, donning somewhat of a uniform and protection, but in Tiberian Dawn they share the same characteristics as their GDI counterparts. Their origins may come about the same as GDI technicians, coming from civilian backgrounds and therefore with little experience. Despite their devotion to NOD, combat fatigue and poor morale can cause mental breakdowns and self-preservation to override given orders. In regards to their firearms, GDI technicians may be assigned mostly Glock 17s and Beretta M9s, both handguns being widely used by several global militaries and even civilian use, while non-technicians may come about with old Russian Stechkins, Makarovs, and possibly Tokarev TT-33s or Chinese QSZ-92 pistols. Well, I must take a step to the side and say if you made it this far, then honestly, congratulations. I doubt we're even halfway through, but we're almost to the good stuff, so hang in there. And speaking of, we'll probably get to the most memorable unit in the entirety of Tiberian Dawn, the Commando. Usually deployed for special operations like blowing up an airfield, which if you don't know, you can skip a whole mission doing that, just saying, or destroying a Mammoth Tank facility using nothing but a suppressed sniper rifle and C4 explosives. Even if they're vulnerable to something as simple as a Hum-Vee or a Buggy, these guys can be real pain if you tunnel vision on the battlefield. In-game, their build icon resembles a Commando, wielding a Mossberg 500 shotgun, which is quite the challenge to take down anyone at a distance. The in-game unit, based on info from CNC Wiki, however, is reported to use what is believed to be its 12.7mm or 50 caliber for US friends, variant of the Cobretti AR-70 Raptor assault rifle as seen as Renegade. But luckily with the release of the Remastered, the Commando appears to be using a British Accuracy International AWM, as evident by its bipod periodically seen firing or when home. For use against buildings, conventional C4 charges are depicted for anti-structure operations. Given the ease to make C4 under the right conditions and environments, it will be a rather valuable asset to have in combat, which I'm not explaining here. The Commando ditches the use of common BDUs, battle dress uniforms, and instead dons camouflage trousers with colours of their legions, utility vest, combat boots, and beret. You know, the whole fucking Rambo style Commando gear. You know what I'm talking about. Commandos in the real world can stem from various backgrounds and professions. For GDI, Commandos may stem from several special forces units, like the United States' Army Green Berets, Army Rangers, or the US Navy's SEAL teams, just to name a few. The iconic British Special Air Service, or Royal Commandos, Russian Spetsnaz, Italian Army Special Forces Command, French Special Forces Command, the German KSK, the Commando Spezialkräfte, I wonder what that means, Egyptian Al-Saka Forces, and South African Special Forces. Given the tendency in common use for Commandos to use suppressed marksman/sniper rifles, for US forces, American Commandos may utilize the M24 SWS, or Sniper Weapon System, which entered service in 1988 and is still in use with similar weapons like the M40 and M21, also making an appearance, with both rifles being used as far back as Vietnam. For British units, it's likely the aforementioned Accuracy International AWM may be used alongside the L118A1 AWC Precision Bolt Action Rifle by the SAS, Jesus that's a mouthful, and even Barrett 50 caliber M82A1. For Russian Specialized Forces, we can see the SVD Dragunov, an iconic Soviet sniper rifle, make an appearance alongside more modern systems like the SV98, which didn't come to service until 2003, or the VSS Vintorez, a sniper adaptation of the AS-VAL introduced in 1987, alongside possibly even the VSK-94, both of rifles being used by various Spetsnaz units. French SFC Commandos may utilize the GS-FRF-2 sniper rifle as it enters service in 1986 and currently still in use in the French Armed Forces. German KSK Commandos may utilize the mentioned AWM or the G82 sniper rifle, the German designation for the Barrett 50 caliber M82 used by the US, which was commissioned in 1989. Italian forces may use their stockpile of Finnish Sacco TRG-42 primarily used by parachute regiments and American M82 Barretts. Egyptian forces use a plethora of rifles from Soviet Dragunovs to West German PSG-1s, American M24s, M40A1s and Barrett M82s, while South African forces fielded the Denel NTW-20, which entered service in 1998. For NOD, operatives can stem anywhere from already trained NOD operatives from the Black Hand to trained terrorist operatives or even contracted mercenaries like PMCs. Therefore, tracking what equipment were being used is a bit more difficult. For rifles, it's the likes of the Soviet Dragunov or the Chinese QBU-88s, which were commissioned to the PLA or People's Liberation Army in 1997, and Type 85 sniper rifles, which are just the Chinese renditions of the Soviet SVD. For explosive ordnance, for all sides, as stated, C4, given the right ingredients and environment, can create quite potent explosive, which again will not be discussed here for safety reasons and non-accountability. Genuinely interested in how C4 is created, I'm sure there are sources on it. They're out there, okay? They're out there. Anyway, C4 has been commissioned by the United States military since the 1950s. Since its creation in the United Kingdom, which originally created the first RDX-based explosive during World War II, and as such, US Commando units would exploit this nifty construct liberally. I mean, why wouldn't you? Passive explosive go boom. Awesome. British Commandos would use a variety of passive explosives like PE4, 7 and 8, SX4 and C4, with French Commandos majorly using the C4 also. Italian forces using the T4 Plastico, which I imagine is the Italian variant of the C4, not just RDX slapped into dough to create anti-tank pizza knives, which would be interesting. German forces could use something known as the Sprengkörper DM12 and Seismoplast 1, but I'm not entirely sure if they would exist around the time of the First Tilburg War. If there's any German explosive specialist, hit me up. Russia will probably make use of the PVV-5A plastic explosive, and South Africa with the PE-9, another variant of the C4. For NOD, it's without doubt they would acquire and create their own volatile batches from terrorist groups, with RDX-based explosives being widely used since 1988 in several attacks, and C4 itself being used by Al-Qaeda in attacks on the USS Code 2000 at the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia in 1996. And with that, we've made it through the infantry segment, and at long last we get on to the beast of steel and plexiglass. So, with the infantry out of the way, finally get onto the vehicles. This one's going to be a juicy one. Let's get through it. So, commonly used as recon or anti-infantry support, the GDI Hum-Vee, or High Mobility Multi-Purpose Wheeled Vehicle, which is quite the mouthful, was used during the war. In-game, the Hum-Vee utilised a 7.62mm M60 machine gun mounted on the roof and as a primary attachment, in contrast to what would be the M2 Browning as a standard mounted machine gun, although it is reported that US Armed Forces were to implement M134 miniguns, tow launchers and automatic grenade launchers. As such, US GDI forces would undoubtedly field the GDI Hum-Vee with the 50 caliber M2 as a primary scouting support vehicle for infantry. For British forces, we can see the Weapon Mount Installation Kit variant of the Land Rover Wolf, which was introduced in 2002. It's tough to see if they would have been used or deployed in time to see service against Nod, albeit slightly quick retrofits to the base Land Rover Wolf will be made in order to be deployed by the time the war starts. Nonetheless, these variants allow the outfitting of 12.7mm heavy machine gun, probably the M2 Browning, 7.62mm GPMG or general purpose machine gun, most likely the Belgian FN mag, known as the L7 under British production, with the 12.7 in the back and the 7.62mm on the passenger side. Over in France, French forces would deploy with the VBL or, oh Jesus, here we go, the Panhard Véhicule Blindé de Guerre. Sorry, France. Or, in the King's English, the Light Armour Vehicle. Wow, that's an edit. Introduced back in 1985 and sporting a variant of the AA-52 known as the ANF-1, a 7.62mm machine gun mounted on the roof similar to the Hum-Vee. In good old Deutschland, the Germans, utilising their fine knowledge of automobiles, would try at least to deploy the ATF, no, not the ones that shoot the dogs, bear with me, the ATF Dingo, which entered service sometime in 2000, although having been tested as far back as 1995. As for armament, it's reported to use a remote-controlled Rheinmetall 7.62mm MG3 machine gun on the roof. If this is not applicable, it's likely that the LAPV Enoch would take its stead, which is also sported in MG3. Down in Italy, Italian forces may deploy the Puma 4x4, an odd hybrid of an ABC and Scout car, but nonetheless fits the Hum-Vee bill. The Puma could utilise either 7.62mm, 12.7mm or RCWS remote control weapon system, like what we see in the base game, and with Renegade, with the guns in question likely to be the Beretta MG42-59, which is just the Italian licensed version of the German MG3, or an M2 Browning. The Iveco LMV was reported to be used with an RCWS, only with bets placed on it being the Italian hit roll bearing a 12.7mm Browning M2. Over in the good old former Union, we're likely to see the Russians field much chunkier boys than the Western counterparts, like the BRDM-2 and the BPM-97, with the former being an older Soviet-era scout car, fielding a 14.5mm KPVT machine gun, and brought in around 1962, and the latter brought in around 1999, and can field either 40.5mm KPVT or the 12.7mm Cord machine gun. In Egypt, it's widely seen that APCs take the role of recon vehicles over conventional armoured cars, but a combination of the BRDM-2 and Hum-Vee itself could be used to fit this role, as the Egyptian armed forces have fielded the BRDM back in 1968, which were then modified by Poland in 2001, and Hum-Vees being purchased as far back as 1995. In South Africa, like with Egypt, there's a primary emphasis on IFVs and APCs, with mainly recon vehicles likely coming from civilian 4x4s modified for combat use, probably with upgraded armour, and if armed, probably with a 30 caliber or 50 caliber Browning machine guns, the FN mag, or the Vector SS-77 machine gun. Nod responds to GDI's Hum-Vee with a vehicle matching the Brotherhood's tactics in the field. Where GDI emphasises a show of force and superior firepower, Nod focuses on hit-and-run tactics with often cheaper materials to take down their industrious foe. A crude and simple yet effective tool in Nod's arsenal to support this doctrine takes the form as the Nod attack buggy. In-game, this is represented as an M34 light patrol vehicle, mainly made from scrap metal and modified with a basic machine gun, which is revealed to be an M60 similar to the GDI Hum-Vee. Accompanied with the recon bike, they form a formidable recon and fast attack force with anti-infantry and anti-armor supplements. According to the CNC wiki, the non-buggy tanks its speed down to a turbo-boosted engine providing 850 horsepower to the vehicle. I'm no mechanic, but that's pretty fast. Now, given the non-buggy's vagueness in regards to its construction, the closest vehicle it seems to stem from takes the form of the American Desert Patrol vehicle, which saw service in the first Gulf War in 1991, before being replaced by the Hum-Vee, making it highly likely non-militants could either capture such vehicles or persuade soldiers to hand them over during the war. In the real world, the ATPV would come equipped with a 50 caliber machine gun, Mark 19 40mm grenade launchers, or M136 tow missiles, but it usually came with 2 M60s or a 50 caliber Browning machine gun. In terms of speed, the vehicle can only output 200 horsepower compared to Nod's 850 horsepower engine on the in-game buggy. Given Nod's tendency to reuse assets, it's, like mentioned before, it's quite possible the buggy is a salvaged light vehicle or even a modified Doom buggy with basic armor plating and an MG of various mounts for combat. As we know, Nod's ingenuity knows no bounds. Now, back over to GDI. With the threat of Tiberian infesting Earth and Nod ambushes aplenty, emphasis on infantry protection is preferable to long-term survival of crucial manpower. Following tradition of armoured transport, GDI commissions the APC for safe transport of personnel. Who'd go figure. In-game, the APC does as it says, providing the modest firepower similar to a Hum-Vee with a forward-mounted M60 machine gun and increased armour protection. In the real world, the APC is based off of the American M113 APC, which began service in 1961, and instead of the in-game's M60 is swapped for a 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. And the M13 is likely to be seen, of course, with American forces, but also in possession of Egyptian and most European forces, especially Germany possessing approximately 4,000 units, and Egyptian forces possessing nearly 2,447 M113s, reportedly. As for other nations, it's likely GDI forces commissioned from France would utilize the VAB, or Véhicule de l'Avant Bleed. Yep. Which entered service around 1976, and approximately 5,000 exist today, with the APC variant in question being the VAB VTT. The primary weapon of such a vehicle comes mounted with an AA-52 7.62mm or 30 caliber machine gun, or a 12.7mm 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. British forces may engage with the FV-432, which came into service in 1963 and at its peak in the 80s reach around 2,500 units were being used. For main armament, they utilised the L7 GPMG, a domestic version of the Belgian FN MAG, as mentioned in the Hum-Vee entry. Germany is likely to use their own small supply of M113s alongside the TPZ of Transportpanzerfuchs APC, which entered service since 1979. Mounted on the Fuchs is up to 3 MG3 machine guns, chambered in 7.62mm rounds. Back over to Italy, the upgraded and bigger brother of the Puma 4x4 makes an appearance, known as the Puma 6x6. Wow. Amazing. Like its smaller brother, the 4x4, it too can utilise the Beretta MG42-59, the M2 Browning, or the hit roll RCWS with an M2 Browning. Given the APC was produced and entered service around mid-2003, it's possible the war could be well over at that point, and if production did ramp up due to the war kicking off, we could see them make use of the Swedish Bandwagen 206S, an APC variant of the aforementioned 206, and able to be outfitted with a heavy machine gun, likely the Browning. Oh dear god. Alright, take a shot every time I mention the M2 Browning in this video and see how it goes. Just note that I'm not going to be held liable for any bouts of alcohol and poisoning. You wimps. Over in the east, Russian forces are likely to bring more offensive firepower to their battles, which what appears to be a mix of an APC's ability to transport forces safely and the IFV's capability to support infantry in a fight. The Russians may come into the fold with their own BTR collection, including the BTR 60s, 70s and 80s, not the BTR 90s since it came into service sometime after 2004, along with the MTLB, which each of these vehicles being former Soviet equipment still in service. The MTLBs was known to use the 12.7mm core machine gun, with the BTR 60, 70 and 80 primarily using the 14.5mm KBVT machine gun, with additional armaments like the lower caliber 7.62 PKT machine guns mounted in the chassis and a coaxial as a coaxial or along with the KBVT. Further south in Egypt, as mentioned, the Egyptian forces made liberal use of their aforementioned stockpile of M113s, but also Soviet BTR-50s bought by the Soviets in the 60s. Even further down in South Africa, we get to what was mentioned in the Hum-Vee entry. South Africa enjoys what seems to be a hybridization of fast recon vehicles like the Hum-Vee and the thick armoured durability of APCs. This chiefly comes in the form of the Mamba, which enters service in 1995 to replace the Buffalo, a vehicle which, if you know your Black Ops 2 missions, may look a bit familiar. The Mamba itself is known to be armed with, yep, you guessed it, the 12.7mm Browning. Curse the cinder block with a pipe attached for being so successful. So, sticking with GDI vehicles, we finally get to the main vanguard of armoured spearheads and notable thorn and nods aside, the medium tank. In-game, the medium tank takes the guise of the American M1 Abrams, which, equipped with a 105mm smoothbore gun instead of the German 120mm bimetal L44 gun used in the real world since 1985, which was then designated M256 when licensed in the US. The main gun isn't the only change, as the 7.62mm coaxial and 12.7mm canopy mounted machine guns are either non-existent or surprisingly yet commonly defective in GDI tanks. Both machine guns being standard in the real world and the APDS, or armor-piercing discarding salvo rounds, being used, which would explain the amount of pathetic damage it does to infantry, despite also using high explosive anti-tank rounds, which, while it can be used against armor, also infantry, but I imagine these limitations exist either because of engine limits or to not make the medium tank OP, who knows. Being a tough girl, she can engage most if not all NOD vehicles in a one-on-one engagement, while suffering out worse to modest damage thanks to her chauffeur armor, a specially made armor plating shared with her British cousin, the Challenger 2, which proves to be quite effective. In our world, we can see the medium tank exists for American forces as, well, the S.S.M, acting as the main battle tank of the US military since the 1980s. For foreign forces, we can see the medium tank replaced with the Leopard 2A4 for Germany, also using the same-ish 120mm gun as the Abrams and commissioned in 1979, with previous models of the Leopard 2 being upgraded to the 2A4. Britain rolls out with the FV4030 Challenger 1 and the FV4034 Challenger 2 tanks, being commissioned in 1982 and 1998 respectively. The former using L11A5 120mm gun and the latter using the L30A1 120mm gun. France may deploy with the Leclerc main battle tank commissioned in 1992 with an estimated 892 units made by 2007 and comes armed with the GS CN120-26-52 120mm gun. It's possible to see elements of the AMX-30 being used which saw service until 2011 and used the Canon the 105mm Model F1. Over in Italy, we can see them deploying a C1 Ariete, which came into service in 1995 and also using a 120mm Otto-bred L44 smoothbore gun. But somehow either sustained casualties were suffered with the Ariete or mobilization of vehicles in which the demand fighting back get nod. Italian forces may delve into an older stockpile of American M47 patents, armed with the 90mm M36, originally with prototypes being worked on, involving the British Royal Ordnance L7 105mm L52 cannon, but eventually it was decided not to upgrade the tanks due to purchasing of the Leopard 1, which filled the gap in the patent and the RES until 2008. Russia breaks the trend of the 120mm and with its T-90s, 125mm 2A46M and possibly existing arsenal of T-80s armed with a 125mm 2A46-2, with the former entering main service in 1994 and the T-80 as far back as 1976. In the African theatre, especially on the Egyptian front against Nod, Egyptian forces were deployed with modern M1 Abrams and older M60 patents armed with the 105mm M68 smoothbore gun, while in South Africa, limited numbers of their Oliphant tanks would make an appearance, possibly in the final days of the African front, given they numbered only 62 in active service and over 100 in storage. with the tank in question being a modified British Centurion armed with a rifled 105mm L7 gun and entered service back in 1976. Now, like with the attack buggy, Nod counterattacks with their own supplement of cheaper, albeit weaker armoured vehicles, commissioning the light tank. As the name implies, this unit sacrifices firepower and armour for mobility, suiting Nod's doctrines well. In the original game, unit renders and manuals, it resembles the American M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. However, in the remastered version, it resembles the Soviet T-5455, a heavily outdated MBT compared to the modern GDI tanks, given the T-5455 was replaced by the T-72 in the 70s. In-game, the light tank comes armed with a 75mm gun, whereas in cutscenes, it comes armed with a 25mm M242 Bushmaster autocannon and BGM-71 tow missile launchers and man turrets as it appears in the real world. For this to be Nod's main battle tank would be a death sentence for armoured operations, with his 25mm cannon have to be used against infantry and his tow launcher his main anti-armour weapon. It's only effective if the missile hits, which may prove difficult with modern countermeasures and armour. Alternatives to the M2 Bradley, Nod could commission his main battle tanks may have to come from Nod's affiliated allegiances such as China, or use old Soviet connections, given ties to the Soviet Union red alert. Such as vehicles may come about in the form of the T-72s or T-80s of the former Soviet Union, or Norinco, or Chinese North Industries Group Corporation Limited. Type 69, nice, 80, 85 and 88 main battle tanks, which would be in abundance around the time of the war and provided the adequate firepower to combat GDI armour, with Type 69, nice, bearing either 100mm smoothbore or 105mm rifle cannon. Type 80-85 having 105mm and Type 88 a 125mm gun. Suiting the role of a light tank, however, may be the Type 62 armed with an 85mm gun. Made in 1963, it's believed over 2,454 units have been created since. Another candidate resides in the Soviet BMP-3, made in 1987, and with a 100mm 2A70 gun, could indeed stand a chance against GDI armour. Coming up to assist in GDI advances against Nod installations, the GDI MLRS assists in both the anti-ground and even anti-air attacks. In-game, it takes the form of the American M270 MLRS, which in the real world exists not only in American arsenals, but various European nations like Germany, Italy, France and the United Kingdom, albeit in smaller numbers. Like in-game, the MLRS fulfills its purpose as an area barrage weapon for open and urban environments. As for its anti-air capability, it has a lot to be desired, given the MLRS's primary focus on ground-to-ground combat. The MLRS itself commonly uses the M26, M26A1A2, and M3031 unguided rockets, or the guided MGM-140 ATAC-MS missile. For the unguided missiles, usually mainly for barrage attacks and fire support, the M26 is recorded to have an effective firing range of about 32 kilometers or 19.9 miles. The M26A1A2 rockets about 45 kilometers or 28 miles, and the M3031 around 70 kilometers or 43.5 miles. For the ATAC-MS, it recorded its maximum firing range lays between 165 to 300 kilometers or 103 to 186 miles. The unguided M26 missile is known to use 644 M77 DPICM anti-infantry and anti-material grenades for saturation barrage, which explains its efficiency against infantry and somewhat effectiveness against armour, especially light vehicles. So what of nations like South Africa and Russia that don't feel the M270? Well, we can see the Russian GDI forces field the likes of the BM-24, BM-21 Grad, BM-27 Oregon, and BM-30 Smech, all being in service with the Russian Federation from 1963 to 1975 and 1989 respectively, and firing the 140mm, 200 and 300mm rockets. For South Africa, we can see the Valkyrie and Bateleur FV2 introduced in 1972 and 1979 respectively, and firing the 120mm rockets. Nod retaliates with a long-range siege weapon with a simple yet effective tool of war from approximately a century, and the absolute favourite weapon of the Bosnians, artillery. In-game, the non-artillery resembles the American M110 howitzer, which has been commissioned in the 1960s and retired later around 1994. In-game, it's said to have a 155mm gun, however in the real world possesses the M115 203mm gun. M10s were in prevalent use in the Middle Eastern nations throughout the time of the war, especially in Egypt. Given those connections to most terrorist groups and Middle Eastern nations supporting the Brotherhood, acquiring the M110 would not be tricky. If M110s aren't available, however, it's possible Nod would make use of Chinese Type 83 152mm guns or old Soviet 2S19 MSTA-S, 2S9 Nona, and 2S5 Jetson-S artillery systems, again given connections to the former Union, and use of Brotherhood's nods to China. It would make sense for the M110 to be in prevalent use for its variation of projectiles, as the gun can fire anything from conventional high explosive shells to shells that can deploy sarin gas of all things, and tactical nuclear shells. Yep, just like the nuke cannon in generals. The same can be said for the 2S19 and 2S5, which were and are still capable of lobbing high explosive, smoke, white phosphorus, and again, nuclear shells. So yeah, you know that mod for remastered version of CNC with the nuke tank? Well, that could technically be canon. If this is true, let's hope not, unless you're naughty, then well, peace through nuclear power. Now we're going to see the more intriguing parts of the video as we get into the more unique vehicles, and what better way to introduce them than the big girl herself, the mighty Mammoth Tank. In game, this gargantuan of a beast deploys with twin 120mm smoothbore guns, which was the norm for MBTs at the time, but only one, not two, of course, and 12 60mm rocket pods with 6 on each side of the turret, allowing for multi-role attacks with anti-air, infantry and vehicle assistance, with heavy damage sustained to aircraft and infantry. In-game, the tank is reported to be powered by an atomic generator, providing enough propulsion to carry the vehicle in conjunction with extra armour, its guns, and the necessity to keep it repaired and stocked with ammo. In-game, the Mammoth Tank lasted from the later years of the First Tiberian War, probably the early 2000s or 2020 if no such video on when the First Tib War started is when anything to go off of, all the way to the Second Tib War, where the Forgotten are seen using them on occasion, and even by GDI in the last mission if you find the base in the northwest. With the Mammoth, of course, returning in CNC3. In the real world, as far as we know, no such tank as the Mammoth Tank exists in current military arsenal. Again, as far as we know. However, the concept of a super heavy tank or multi-barrel tank has existed long before this. In Germany in the 1970s, for example, the Versuchsträger VT series of tanks produced with either two 105 or 120mm guns attached to a fixed hull-locked chassis. Another tank similar to this would be the Japanese Type 60 self-propelled guns with two 106mm recoilless guns attached, but is heavily distinguishable from a Mammoth Tank. Looks nothing like it. Clearly, that don't look like a Mammoth Tank. Going further back in history, what closely resembles the Mammoth Tank are the German Moss and P1000 Ratte tanks, the former being a 188-ton tank with only 2 prototypes made near the end of the war before Soviet capture, and one currently displayed in the Kubinka Tank Museum located in the west of Moscow. The P1000 Ratte is nothing more than a concept designed by Nazi Germany near the end of World War II. The tank being armed with the main guns of a German cruiser, yes, a German cruiser, with smaller guns located in the turrets on the roof, and being approximately 11 meters or 36 feet in Yankee units tall and 14 meters or 46 feet wide. Seriously, you'll have to look this thing up. It's an absolutely ludicrous unit. Nonetheless, the idea of a super heavy tank more or less died off after the Second World War, where main battle tanks with sufficient armour and mobility took over for armour support, which still carries on today, like as mentioned in the medium tank entry. Especially in an age of air superiority, wire-guided missile systems, and more advanced anti-armour weapons, it would be a real heartache to see what could be considered the pride of a nation be destroyed by a plane or just a few soldiers with AT weapons. Plus, taking into account the sheer amount of materials needed for such a weapon, it would be easier to make smaller, more nimble vehicles that do the job quite well. Therefore, sadly, as beautiful as a Mammoth Tank is, I don't think we're going to be seeing this anytime soon. Yeah, tragedy to befall all mankind. So, as we're entering the weird and wacky weapons of Command and Conquer Tiberian Dawn, we're going to get to what Nod replies with in terms of firepower. They step into the role with a weapon so simple yet effective and terrifying, always being the one to strike fear and destroy morale. Nod resurrects a weapon that has been seen since the 70s with the Flame Tank, a huge flamethrower on tracks. Simple yet effective. The Nod Flame Tank reduces infantry to ash and buildings to dust in just a few bursts, making it effectively deadly when combined with light tanks and or recon bikes. In-game, it takes the appearance of a home-brewed armoured vehicle, tracked, installed with a custom canopy and hull-mounted compartment. Noticeable are 2 large canisters on the back and 2 nozzles, one on each side, possibly pressurized to extend the distance of fire. I don't know. Due to the development of modern warfare and the lack of wars focusing on engaging urban centres or clearing entrenchments like the Wall of Wars for instance, no such flame tanks exist in the modern world to even make a reference to, with possibly the most recent flame tank, inverted commas, being the M132 armoured flamethrower, which last saw service in 1978. With such a large vulnerable target designed for an anti-structure, anti-infantry role in an open environment, it would pose a juicy target to anti-tank weaponry and airstrikes with little opposition or difficulty. However, looking in the past, flame tanks were abundant from the Second World War to Vietnam, and were used by most major nations including the US, using flame tanks like the Sherman Crocodile, M67 Zippo in Vietnam. Various Flampanzers of different models in World War II and Soviet tanks like the OT-34 and OT-3485. As mentioned earlier, the use of flame tanks died out after the war in Vietnam as warfare changed and air warfare took dominance of supporting ground forces. With the improvement in jet technology, smart bombs and nasties include thermobaric weapons, essentially fuel air bombs like the CC Generals, and napalm. Most likely we will see makeshift or retrofitted armoured vehicles with flamethrowers attached for Nod R&D. As for the possibility of such a vehicle being made or being commissioned, it's hard to tell as flamethrowers equipped infantry could prove to be more beneficial, becoming less of a target, can clear out tight spaces more effectively with less of a strain on resources for an organisation lacking the industrial output of GDI. Unfortunately, as awesome and frightening of an idea as the flame tank is, sadly it has to sit this one out in terms of effective combat vehicles, and quite possibly, I doubt Nod will ever feel such a thing. There's a black hand for you, ain't it? Adorable, fire-loving psychos. You gotta love them. So, mid-video pop quiz. Little test to see if you've been paying attention. That kind of good stuff. What's the one thing that we've established so far with Nod? What's the one thing that they can tend to bang on about time and time again? Peace through power? Well, yeah, they do bang on about that quite a lot. In the name of Cain, that's another one. Look, it's hit and run, right? You know, the recon bike, the attack bike. It's hit and run. Okay, yeah. Anyway, demonstrating this doctrine of hit and run against the developed world in GDI, Nod's focus on such a doctrine led to the development of the stealth tank, or Ezekiel's wheel, as done by Cain himself, which is a reference to the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament of the Bible, where he had visions of heaven and God, and wherever wheels are, people will follow, something like that. I don't know if there's Christians and help me out with this stuff, I'd greatly appreciate it. Which is quite clever, if that's true. With stealth tanks supposedly acting as a prophecy for the potential Nod being a covert, silent, asymmetrical organisation, able to hit wherever, whenever, and as long as they want. After all, who was going to believe a GDI soldier in the desert claiming they saw a tank just disappear out of sight? It's either that or somewhat narcissistic approach by Cain, essentially saying, hey, wherever I go, people will follow. Who knows? The dude is apparently the brother of Fable, so yeah, it's Satan Renegade, who knows? Anyway, the stealth tank lives up to its name with a Lazarus shield outfitted on the tank, which, if you know your Christian lore, Lazarus being the dude that Jesus resurrected, seemingly allowing the light waves to reflect and bend around the tank, allowing it to become virtually invisible, not only to the naked eye, but even radar and satellite observation. For armament, the tank comes equipped with 2 rocket pods able to fire Dragon tow missiles that require the vehicle to uncloak to fire. Given its rather new tech, the stealth tank will begin to lose its camouflage capability the more damage it becomes. Now, the concept of vehicles and tanks going on was completely invisible is always a great interest, and probably not that long off, but who knows what global militaries are up to behind closed doors. The idea of stealth tech is actually rather alive and in effect today, however not to the standard of the not-stealth tank. Stealth fighters and bombers like the F-117 featured in CNC Generals and the B-2 bomber nowadays adopt stealth technology in the form of reflective paint on their bodies, able to prevent being picked up by radar installations and therefore greatly avoid being locked on by SAM systems. As for tanks, well, in development is the Adaptive Active Camouflage System, in development by the Swedish Defence Material Administration, commissioned by the British BAE Company, which allowed Allied armour to essentially camouflage its heat signatures as various entities such as other vehicles or even animals, as they claim so far, to the naked eye. It's still a vehicle, of course, but the thermal imaging sensors, it takes the form of something else, so think of it like the Mirage tank from Red Alert 2 and 3, but to the naked eye, doesn't look like a tank turned into a tree or something. This works by rapidly heating and cooling parts of the tank's armour plating to trick hostile thermal sensors. Another vehicle attempting to match this quality is the Polish PL-01 light tank, which implements radiation-absorbent material which can mask radar signatures, which uses radio waves as signals, which is a form of non-ionizing radiation. Similar to the aforementioned F-117 fighters and B-2 bombers, one practical example of a stealth tank is the Swedish Stridsvagn 103, which uses a low-profile approach to blend in and harder to detect. Not quite on par with non-stealth tank, but a good start. After all, avoiding being hit by high-caliber rounds in a tank is highly preferred to anyone wanting to continue living and increase their life expectancy. So, we're not quite to invisible tanks, but hey, if you can't see them, you can't see them. Can't get any better than that. Probably the rarest unit in game and featuring mostly multiplayer Tiberian Dawn, the S.S.M, or surface-to-surface missile launcher, uses missiles with incendiary warhead, probably napalm or some makeshift flammable substance, and used mostly for anti-infantry or anti-structure attacks. Judging from the in-game model, it looks to be based on the GDI MLRS, just with the rocket pods removed at the back. According to the wiki, the warheads are seemed to be Honest John missiles, which did exist back in the 1950s in the US, and remained in service until 1991, and originally designed to deliver Mark 7 nuclear warheads. Nod loves their nukes, eh? In the real world, Nod's substitute for the S.S.M may come from old decommissioned Honest Johns, or old Soviet Scud missiles, yes, like the ones from Generals. Either that, or RTR-21 Tuchkas, RTR-23 Okas, 2 K6 Lunas, and the 9K52 Luna M, with these missiles often being used for tactical use by the Soviet Union. If such missiles and vehicles are unavailable, it may be possible makeshift missiles on heavier trucks or converted harvesters may be used for either indirect or laser-guided targeting, with the incendiary compound either being a homebrew concoction of ore salvage, formulated napalm deposits, or the flammable fluids used by the flamethrowers and flame tanks. Where the Buggy acts for anti-infantry recon roles, the Nod attack bike couples with the Buggy to support anti-armor and recon operations. Armed with 4 tow missile launchers with 2 on each side, can engage both aircraft and armor. Given Nod's mechanical and technological ingenuity, the attack bike could stem from either a homebrew creation, which appears to be so given its frame, not matching anything of a vehicle that exists at the time, or, like the non-Buggy, a repurposed, already existing motorcycle, retrofitted and modified to combat-ready standards. The bike being outfitted with a plexiglass visor for the operator and possibly an engine like the Buggy's 850 horsepower, however this is speculated. In terms of armament, it's likely the BGM-71 tow missile launcher will be used in place of the in-game Dragon tow launchers, which I imagine is referencing the M47 Dragon tow launcher meant to be used for over-the-shoulder use, and fell out of service around 2001 with the United States Armed Forces, with the Marines being the last to use it. Other than this, it's hard to really state which weapons or vehicles that the attack bike is based off of. So, if anyone has any ideas what it could possibly closely resemble, do pop it down below. I'm interested to see what you guys come up with.
We begin to move away from the more combat-oriented vehicles of Tiberian Dawn and move on to the one that is pretty much, in the words of Remy himself, The adrenaline of the enemy. Once you hit it, everyone starts descending on you and it's just carnage from there. Yep, it's the big chunk itself, the Harvester. With the sole purpose of harvesting Tiberium, no duh as the name implies, its large, expensive and armoured build allows for defence against small arms fire and reasonable AT fire for some time. According to the CNC Wiki, the Harvester largely resembles that of a combine harvester, which I imagine hydraulic arms at the sides, like pincers on ends that rip the crystals out of the soil, and into the large container mounted on the back, with, I imagine, the coloured front section of the Harvester being a sealed cockpit, of course to protect against possible Tiberium contamination and enemy fire. Until the Third Tiberian War, the Harvester would be vulnerable and unarmed, possessing no defensive capability whatsoever bar its own bulk to protect itself and using its own weight to squish infantry. In the real world, anything associated with the in-game Harvester doesn't really seem to exist. Given Nod constructed the vehicle first, it's possible a retrofitted heavy utility vehicle with a specialised storage container mounted on the back, detachable from the vehicle for harvesting, as we've seen when it loads into the refinery. As to how to harvest Tiberium if it existed, I believe something along the lines of a hazmat cleanup crew, as seen in some in-game cutscenes, to manually harvest Tiberium along with possible assistance from the nation's Army Engineering Corps for GDI or the Civil Defence for any neutral nations assist in Tiberium cleanup. Even after looking this up, it's hard to tell what could be exactly used as a harvester. If Tiberium were to exist, bar the idea again, some form of modified combine harvester with hydraulic arms or something to rip them out of the soil, like a smaller version of those hydraulic tree cutting saw arm things, you know, the ones that picks them up and just, you know, saws all the twigs off and stuff, you know, just rummage under the pod of the Tiberium crystals and yoink. Nonetheless, if anyone has any ideas about this, do feel free to leave a recommendation, especially those in the HGV field. I'm interested to see how this can be achieved. Now we move on to possibly the most valuable piece of material and equipment they could use in the field, especially in the game itself. Contributing to the development of securing a region for both GDI and NOD, the MCV, or Mobile Construction Vehicle, in most operations against GDI and NOD, holds integral to providing artisanal support to the field. In-game, the MCV is possibly the most crucial component in any fight or skirmish, with its loss signaling a drastic reduction in victory in an operation. Used to create something akin to, I'd say, a forward operating base for manpower and materials to be assembled at. It's reported that MCVs, once developed into a construction yard, utilise on-site staff and robotics to produce structures needed in the area. As for the vehicle itself, yeah, remember when I took a shot at harvesters? Like, I got nothing here. Like, yeah, nothing. What can I possibly do with this one? Oh, right. Okay, so if we were to talk about FOBs in this instance, which are usually held machine shops, airfields, helipads, and no doubt barracks and communication centres, the MCV, according to the good old wiki, represents all the materials and equipment needed to get a forward operating base set up, which then would be supported by a larger base or depot far behind the front lines, as it is with many US bases around the world. Given its high-tech nature, as it seems to perform all construction actions and supply equipment procurement by itself, using robotics and advanced computing resources, with some engineers, technicians and soldiers probably remaining in the building for maintenance and upkeep. So it's easier in the real world to see elements of engineering core, as mentioned in the engineer entry, assigned to the construction, fortification and upkeep of these required facilities for equipment, combat personnel and vehicles. Like with the Harvester's entry though, I still look forward to hearing what you guys think what could fit into this entry. Well, hello there. Look at that. We've gotten through vehicles, we've gotten through infantry, so it's safe to say we've gone more than halfway through this video. And if you're still around, oh, God bless you, to be fair. Again, I can't stress enough my thanks for making use of your time to listen to whatever all this is, so I hope you find it enjoyable so far, and as chronic as it probably is, I do apologise. But look, we're near the end of it now, so hang in there while we embark on the final run of this video, Aircraft. In modern war, air superiority is more than a priority today than it was during the First World War, and any war preceding it. with providing combat assistance to ground units, has become more accessible and more deadly. With this in mind, both GDI and NOD have developed their own answers to this in their own way. For the Brotherhood, they bring their answer to this question in the form of the Apache helicopter. In Tiberian Dawn, the Apache oddly utilises only the chain gun mounted on board, making it effective at only light armor targets and infantry, and not its rocket pods mounted on the sides. Funny enough though, it still requires a captured GDI MCV and a helipad made in the campaigns in order to be produced, possibly due to the Apache's technological requirements. In the real world, the Apache is a notorious and popular helicopter gunship in service since 1986, and while it does have a 30mm M230 chain gun, like in the game, it also utilises either AGM-114 guided Hellfire missiles or Hydra 70 rockets. The Apache saw service ironically mostly with the Western world, mainly the United States, Israel, Netherlands, Egyptian and Saudi Arabian militaries. For a while, the UK brandished their own variant dubbed the Augusta Westland Apache. As to how NOD could obtain such a hardware could lie with the purchase from Saudi Arabia, as it was non-aligned during the war, and then the UAE, then being incorporated into their African operations. Another alternative is simply exploiting the connections with US weapon contractors, which was reportedly a common practice until the US government went during the First Tiberian War. If somehow no Apaches could be obtained, it's highly likely that NOD could implement old Soviet Hind gunships used by the Soviet Union in the Second World War. In the regular timeline, not ours. Yeah. And modernise with up-to-date electronics and armaments such as the GSH-23 autocannon, S-8 rockets, and 9K114 Storm ATGMs. With NOD responding to the air support's question with a helicopter, which, to be fair, is a fairly reliable asset in warfare for almost 70 years now, GDI flexes back with its industrial and economic might with the ORCA assault craft. In-game, the ORCA resembles a VTOL, vertical takeoff and land, twin-articulator jet-propelled strike craft displaying surprising maneuverability in exchange for armour, of course. Shown in cutscenes, art files and icon, it possesses a forward-mounted chain gun and 2 rocket pods with 9 missiles held in each. In-game, however, only the rockets are used, which possesses both anti-air and anti-ground capability, providing multi-role support. In the real world, VTOL-capable aircraft are seldom seen outside of conventional helicopters, more like the V-22 Osprey and the Harrier jump jet. So, likely replacement for the ORCA for GDI may lay with, ironically, the aforementioned US Apache gunships, British Augusta Westlands, French, German and Spanish Eurocopter Tigers armed with 68 and 70mm rockets, Italian Agusta A129s using AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, and South African Denel Ruibalk attack helicopters, which entered production in 1998 after a lengthy development process. Over in Russia, like with the Brotherhood, we could see the appearance of the Mi-24 Hind in European operations. Bar helicopters, we could see the British Harrier jump jet introduced in 1989 make an appearance as a replacement for the ORCA, which mainly used unguided rockets or guided missiles for air-to-ground and air-to-air combat. Staying with GDI air support, we get to possibly what is the symbol of modern war and the epitome of air superiority: airstrikes. In-game, these airstrikes are largely called in from GDI forces, and sometimes NOD in multiplayer if they get the great power-up, and are depicted as the A-10 Thunderbolt II close attack craft, being in service since 1977. Unlike the game, where it just uses incendiary bombs for some reason, because, yay, war crimes, everyone loves them. The A-10 uses its GAU-8 autocannon designed to shred apart tanks like they were made out of paper. No kidding, if you've ever seen a picture of the GAU-8, it's huge. In fact, the plane is built around the gun, so that's pretty cool, not gonna lie. And an array of bombs and missiles, usually the AGM-65 Maverick missiles. Given the A-10 is primarily used by the United States, over in Europe it's more likely to see the casserole filled by the likes of the Harrier II for Britain, which saw service within the Royal Air Force between 1989 and 2011. Being able to drop unguided bombs like in the game, but also a plethora of guided bombs and missiles. In addendum, and similarly to the Italian and German Air Force, it's highly likely large appearances of the Panavia Tornado multi-role fighter would accompany GDI forces in Europe, with the craft itself being in use in Germany since 1979, Italy in 1998, and the UK in 1980. Like its Harrier counterpart, it too armed with a various array of armaments, including two 27mm autocannons, guided bombs and missiles, unguided bombs, and even nuclear missiles, taking the form of the B-61 or WE-177 tactical nukes, which is safe to say for a UN-backed nation wouldn't be used. Hopefully. I don't know, maybe Yugoslavia. We all saw how UN and Yugoslavia turned out. Anyway, with Italy, Germany and the UK in a country better their own with attack aircraft, France decided to go their own way due to disagreements with creating a Central European strike craft, which will later lead on to the Dassault Rafale and the Mirage 2000. However, the Rafale entered service with few numbers in December 2000, and the Mirage, while being in existence longer, was only suited mainly for air superiority roles and not CAS support until roughly 2004. In that case, France may have to make use of the Sepacat Jaguars and the Dassault Mirage F1, each being able to carry unguided bombs and enter service in 1977 and 1984 respectively, with the Jaguar being decommissioned from the French Air Force in 2005 and the Mirage F1 sometime in the 2010s. Over in Russia, it's highly likely a mix of Su-24, Su-25, Su-27 and Su-30s, with 24 and 25 being CAS specific and 27 and 30 being multi-role fighters capable of providing ground support. Each of these Sukhoi craft are capable of carrying unguided bombs, which are likely to be the Fab 250 or Fab 500 depending on the craft. In the African campaign, Egyptian forces are likely to deploy their retrieve stockpile of American F-16s that are able to drop Mark 82 unguided bombs on targets of interest. South Africa actually turns up dry on this list due to any aircraft in the bill for GDI forces there being introduced to South Africa in 2008 with the Swedish Saab JAS-39 Gripen. In all likelihood, however, it's possible to see multinational GDI forces take a stronger stance in Africa by deploying a various array of aircraft to assist in peacekeeping and anti-NOD operations, as we've seen in the NOD campaign. Given the logistics of managing and fighting a global conflict, transportation of materials is essential for upholding any conflict. Well, no duh. While GDI can produce vehicles on site with their factories, NOD hauls in their vehicles with the use of a cargo plane to their airfields. The plane in question, according to the wiki, depicts either a C-130 Hercules or C-5 Galaxy transport craft in cutscenes, and in-game, the C-17 Globemaster. IRL, we may see the cargo planes take the form of old Soviet AN-22s or IL-76 strategic airlifters, with the latter likely obtained following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which had at utmost around 310 craft at 1987. Other craft used could also take the form of Antonov AN-124s, which entered service in 1986 and possibly yoinked during the fall of the Union. However, these may be substitutes if NOD somehow cannot obtain C-130s, which may be unlikely as many NOD-aligned nations in South America, the Middle East and Southeast Asian nations possess C-130s, in addendum to connections with military contractors, which NOD can easily requisition for hauling supplies around the world. Where NOD and in some cutscenes GDI use cargo planes to import and export material, both sides also make use of the Chinook transport helicopter for commando or small-scale operations. Both GDI and NOD can use Chinooks as soon as their respective helipads are created. In the real world, of course, the Chinook very much exists as well, the CH-47 Chinook, and sees service amongst US and UK forces prior to the outbreak of the war, with Egypt, Italy and Germany either owning or to own Chinooks of their own during the 2010s. Given not all GDI forces would possess the Helo, it's likely then for France to use the AS-532 Cougar, a transport helicopter in use since 1978, and its older cousin the SA-330 Puma, which entered service in 1968, with both helicopters still in service with the French Army. In Germany, it's likely the American Bell UH-1 Iroquois, or Huey, yep, those guys used in Vietnam in that one cutscene where shot down by an FIM-92 Stinger, which was in service as far back as the late 90s. In Italy, both the Italian Army Aviation Wing and Main Air Force may make use of Augusta Bell helicopters, such as the 205, 206 and 412 variants, and wouldn't make use of Chinooks until 2014 reportedly. Over in Russia, Russian forces are likely to use a combination of MIL Mi-26, the Mi-17 and Mi-2s, with the 26 in service since 1983, the 17 in service since 1977 and 2 since 1965. In Egypt, the Egyptian Air Force would use the MIL Mi-2, 4 and 6, with each still in service and capable of being used to transport helicopters. And finally, in South Africa, the Atlas Oryx, a variant and domestic design of the SA-330 Puma mentioned earlier, and still remains in South African service since 1987. And with that, well, that's it. Well, for aircraft anyway. Yeah, I know. When will this misery end? How long is this going to go on for? How much more of this do I have to endure? But look, hear me out. There's still only 2 more entries left to recover, and understandably overlooked, 2 naval units make an appearance in Tiberian Dawn, primarily with GDI. So to save time, I'll wrap up this segment with the Gunboat and the Hovercraft. In-game, I believe the Gunboat shows up for at most 2 missions for GDI and 2 or 3 for NOD. The Gunboat in-game is primarily armed with just multi-pod rocket launchers that mainly target ground targets. It's unknown what exactly the Gunboat resembles, but according to, once again, the good old wiki, it's believed either the American Cyclone-class patrol boat, commissioned since 1993, and in service with the navies of Egypt, Bahrain, Philippines, or the Danish Osprey 55, used by the Hellenic Navy since 1990, and the Moroccan Navy since 1987, although looking modified in-game, as both of these boats lack missile modules as shown in-game, with only the Cyclone class bearing such a weapon in the form of 2 Mk-60 BGM-176B Griffin B missile launchers. Jesus, that's a mouthful. With the Osprey only possessing a 76mm Auto Melara gun and a 40mm Bofors gun. So, with that out of the way and shine more light on these overlooked units, which, to be fair, is in itself fair, what in the name of Kentucky Fried Fuck would the Gunboat in the respective missions CNC be? Well, it's like in the first mission, GDI mission X-16Y42, that the Gunboat depicted is to be a German Brandenburg-class frigate introduced in 1994, due to obviously the proximity of Germany to Latvia and Germany's role in fighting NOD in the war, in which they somehow get overrun. Yeah. Either way, undoubtedly, aid in patrolling the Baltic Sea. As for the mission where they're attacked by obelisks of light, I've really got nothing there because, well, I mean, the mission apparently takes place somewhere near Budapest. So, it may depict naval vessels going through the Danube River, which leads from the mountains of Switzerland through to the Black Sea. But to send ships from the Black Sea through Romania, right through core NOD territory in Serbia, just to get zapped by big angry finger lasers is, yeah, not the best decision to make. If that's the case, no wonder GDI had logistics issues then. If, just for argument's sake, somehow, by some divine magic, and this is somehow achieved, we could see corvettes belonging to the Russian Baltic Fleet take part in the slaughter, with said corvettes possibly being the Parkim, Nanuchka, and Tarantul class frigates, each being in service during the time of the Soviet Union, but again, I don't know if this is even possible. If it is, do let me know how, because I am interested. Meanwhile, in the African campaign, GDI gunboats appear initially at Mission 9, No Mercy in Egypt, which, if manned by the Egyptian Navy, are likely to come from Spanish Desubierta corvettes, with Egypt having 2 in service since 1984, the El Suez and the Abu Qir. Later on, in both Namibia and Mozambique, 2 more appear in the mission Ezekiel's Will. Oh, I never heard of that. Which, while by the coast, starts getting difficult to pinpoint who exactly may be in the area, but with a French naval presence around Madagascar, it may be possible French corvettes, possibly the Destin de Hove. Again, sorry, France, I didn't do French. Class corvettes provide assistance in Mozambique, with there being at most 17 completed, with 8 believed to be decommissioned by 2000, and these corvettes primarily being armed with Exocet MM-38 surface-to-surface missiles. If anyone knows the Falklands lore, they know how powerful those missiles are. A single 100mm Kadam gun turret and twin Model 20mm F2 gun. As for Namibia, well, it's honestly tough to tell, and I don't have much to work off of, so yeah, again, let me out here. However, South Africa may paint a clearer picture, with 2 gunboats each appearing in 2 mission choices. Now, I'm willing to bet that these may take the form of Warrior class strike craft, built as far back as the late 1970s, and 9 of them being built by the early 1980s, which, as of writing, only 1 is left in commission, but I think that's to be scrapped sometime soon. It's unknown when exactly. Prior to 2012, these ships were armed with Scorpion, again my apologies, missiles, otherwise known as Gabriel missiles, and Otto Melara 76mm artillery gun, 2 20mm guns, and 2 12.7mm machine guns. Quite possibly our favourite cinder block with a pipe, the M2 Browning. So with the gunboat out of the way, finally at long last we get to an even rarer unit to make an appearance as we move on to the Hovercraft, which is shown primarily by GDI Forces submissions to offload anything from Minigunners and Commandos to Hum-Vees, medium tanks and MCVs. In-game it appears frequently in the GDI campaign, being able to only offload units onto a shoreline and depart as soon as disembarkation is completed. In the real world, military hovercrafts of course exist, for various nations around the world, mainly for amphibious exercises and operations since the 1960s, with the UK, US and Soviet Union largely utilising these crafts. The in-game hovercraft bears resemblance to the real world US LCAC, or Landing Craft Air Cushion, Jeff A variant, developed in the 1970s, went into service in 1986. There isn't really a difference between what's shown in game and the real world equivalent, with just one exception. The real world LCAC is capable of fire support with 2 12.7mm or 50 caliber machine gun mounts, capable of supporting the M2HB 50 caliber machine gun, a Mark 19 Mod 3 40mm grenade launcher, or an M60 machine gun. Overseas, British GDI forces may utilise the Royal Marine Griffin Hoverwork 2000 series hovercraft used since around the 1980s. Italy during the final assault on the former Yugoslavia could provide naval invasion support in the form of LC-23s, LCM-62s, MTM-217s and MTP-96 landing vessels capable of delivering vehicles and personnel. For the Russians, which possibly provided assistance in the opening stages of the GDI campaign during the invasion of Yugoslavia and possibly later on in Greece, it's possible for them to use old Soviet Zhubr class LCSEs like the one seen in Red Alert 2. Very rarely, Nod uses hovercraft only during covert operations and the secret dinosaur campaign. Yeah, moving on. As to how this could come to be, well, it's quite possibly use Chinese Jinsha 2 LTCACs, which came into service around 1989, but given this scenario in question, it's possible GDI will lend a hand in this very unique situation, but I've done enough with this one. Just want to explain the dinosaur campaign. It's up to you guys. I got nothing for this one. Oh, and so finally, decisively, definitively, we're done with the video. Yay! I'm sure you're as happy to see the end as I am, but no, genuinely, I'm going to speak from the heart and not sugarcoat or anything and say if you did manage to watch through the whole thing, listening to whatever the hell this is and having to bear with absolute bare minimum editing and all of that, then honestly, I've not more to say than I give my sincere thanks. Even if you just watch a few articles or somehow survive the first section of this, it really does mean a lot. And I am open to speculation that a lot of things in this video aren't going to be accurate, and I don't claim them to be, because this is more just a passion project more than anything else. It's not a decisive view as to what's what, because I'm sure there are more verifiable sources that I could see put in for many of these things. So I am genuinely looking forward to seeing creative feedback in the comment section, which is a lot to ask for a YouTube comment section nowadays. But anyway, yeah, I'm hoping you all enjoyed. That's kind of the main reason why I did this in the first place. But yeah, it's been a mad ride going through this. I have no idea how long it's been to make this video. This has been something that's been on and off a lot, because there's been, you know, spurs of inspiration, and then what's the point, and then get back into it, and then balancing to do recording when the time is right, you know, voiceover, and getting the time to do proper editing and stuff, and having time to do all that. It's interesting, it's fascinating. So yeah, again, I hope you all enjoyed this, and if you want to see more, then you're in luck, because absolutely after this I'll have to work on a Red Alert video. And as of recording this, I have notes done, I have the script done, I think I have footage gathered, I don't know, I might have to look into that again. So absolutely expect a Red Alert video like this to come out. What date? What year is it? 2023. Expect in 2028. No, of course. So yeah, if you're looking forward to that, definitely hang around. That will go up at some stage, unless some god awful happens, which I sincerely hope not. And yeah, once again, I'm really looking forward to seeing what feedback comes out of this. Who knows, someday with my editing skills improved, and once I do a better job of whatever the hell this is, there may be a remaster someday. It may look more appealing, and especially with knowledge from you guys who know more about what could apply in this situation, it'll be a match made in heaven, absolutely. So yeah, definitely stay tuned, definitely be on the lookout, and well, see you all in Red Alert. Have a good day, everyone, and thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all again someday. Farewell, have a good day.